Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about some introductory tips to beginning your yoga practice. You'll notice that I have a yoga mat here, and I actually have my yoga mat doubled up. It's also on a rug. If you are sensitive, specifically being on your hands and your knees, you want to make sure that you have a blanket available to pad the knees. The other thing that you might note is that I am barefoot, and I know there's a lot of hesitation in going barefoot in yoga classes, but there is actually a reason, a very good reason for going barefoot. The first is that by not wearing shoes, we actually strengthen our feet. And yoga is very much a rooted, active feet practice. So unless your doctor has suggested that you do not exercise or walk around barefoot, I would recommend taking your shoes off. The other thing that you'll notice is that I am barefoot. And the reason for this is that I am receiving sensation. Your feet have thousands of sensory receptors on them. And when we wear socks and when we wear shoes, oftentimes that part of our brain that lights up when we walk or when we move over uneven ground actually becomes less strong, that connection. And it's really important to maintain that connection, specifically as we become older, because falling is obviously a great risk and can oftentimes lead to death if we fall, for example, and break the hip or other body part. So engaging the feet is easiest if you are barefoot. The other thing is that I have a yoga mat, and you'll notice that it is relatively thin. So a yoga mat is not the same thing as a exercise mat. Exercise mats tend to be thicker and they tend to be foamier and they don't feel sticky. When I am barefoot, my feet kind of stick to my mat, and that'll actually make it easier to do some of your poses. If your mat is too padded, like say for example, if you have carpet down, one of the things that you might note is that sometimes it is more difficult to balance, for example, on one leg. And so in that case, you could just step off of the mat to balance. So having a solid foundation, a solid surface, makes balancing much easier. When we begin our yoga practice, we often start with a short meditation. And this is just a practice to remove distractions so we can be fully present in the moment. If you are not comfortable at first sitting on the floor, I would recommend just using a chair. And you don't want to have a chair with sides, with arms, and you want it to be firm. And you want to make sure that when you sit down, your feet are firmly planted on the earth. And so this can be your beginning meditation, your beginning practice. You'll also note that I do not have any loose clothing. So oftentimes, specifically with shirts, if you wear a big oversized t-shirt, or maybe even just a regular t-shirt, when you get in poses where your head is low, you'll find that that will fall over your head. And so wearing form-fitting clothing actually aids in the practice. So you don't want to be messing with your clothing while you are in a yoga posture, because one, it just takes you out of the moment of being in that posture. And two, it could actually be relatively dangerous, because if I'm messing with my shirt while I'm in a downward dog, I might actually hurt myself. So I'm gonna show you how to come into a seated position. And I also wanted to mention yoga blocks. So yoga blocks are oftentimes very, very helpful, not just only for beginners, but for more advanced practitioners. The issue comes with how squishy the blocks are. Any block is better than perhaps no block, but squishy blocks are not ideal. So you want a block, if you're going to invest in these, I would recommend feeling the block and making sure that it is firm. So you can actually use the block to sit on in our beginning meditation. So you'll notice that when I sit down and cross my legs, this is easy pose, that my knees are actually higher than my hips. And this is a little bit challenging, specifically to get comfortable in this posture, to keep an upright spine. So you want to make sure that your shoulders are stacked right over your hips, your head right over your shoulders. So to ease your way into this pose, you can either use a pillow or even a block. And the idea is to sit on the very edge of the block like this, right? And so you'll now notice that my hips are above my knees, and this will actually make it easier for me to sit upright in this position. You could also fold a blanket. The important thing is that I'm like very much on the edge of the block, and I feel like I could sit here for easily 5 minutes. Okay, so we are going to start actually on hands and knees. So one of the things that is really important in your practice are your hands, because yoga is a practice that allows us to use our hands almost as if they are feet. And so we are going to bear weight on our hands a lot in this class. So you need to take care of your hands. So coming onto all fours, just notice if you spread your fingers and have active hands, if this feels okay to you. Now, some of you might have wrist issues, and I would recommend, if this is like painful, maybe you might go see your doctor or talk to somebody about it, because you shouldn't feel any sharp shooting pain or tingling or numbness when you have your hands planted on the ground. You want to make sure that you spread your fingers, specifically your thumb, and you don't let specifically your index finger come off of the floor. So if I have really lazy hands, it is going to possibly lead to some issues with the wrist as you progress through this class. So we actually want very active hands, spreading the fingers. And you could note if your elbows are stacked directly over your wrists here. And make sure that you're not hyperextending your elbows. So hyperextending the elbows would be taking the pit of your inside of your elbow forward. So if I'm on all fours and I like crank my elbows forward, this is not going to make me happy with my elbows. So you want to make sure that they are pointing to the edges of the mat, to the corners of the mat, actually. And that will help in making it so that you don't get any wrist issues during this course. Okay, so another important aspect are the feet. And so we're going to just check in with the feet by curling the toes under. Now, there is a lot of connective tissue underneath your feet, and you should not feel any burning, tingling, or numbness on the bottoms of your feet when you do this. So if you have issues with curling your toes under, you'll want to make sure that you do the video that is specifically designed to stretch out your foot. And you want to make sure that you perhaps maybe even do some foot exercises that will help with that particular issue. When we come into what is referred to as a downward dog, here I'm going to curl my toes under. I'm going to lift my hips up, and I could keep my knees bent and press my upper body back. So the important thing about your downward dog is not so much that you straighten your legs, but rather that you make sure that your spine is straight. So you could always keep your knees bent, but as long as your spine is straight, that is what we're looking for. We're looking for a straight line from the top of the head to your tailbone. Your tail is high in the sky. And then, perhaps over time, if it's not already available to you, you will actually be able to get your heels down to the floor. So this is our downward dog. Taking a deep breath in, bringing it back and onto all fours. Now, as you watch the videos, I'm going to be going through a series of poses, and it is really important that you move slowly. So even if you're watching me and you're like, oh no, she's already standing at the top of her mat in Tadasana, and I am still in downward dog, it's important that you move slowly. So many of the injuries come about from moving too quickly through the transitions. So you want to just slow it down. You don't want to throw your body into a posture. You want to make sure that you take it nice and slow. So let's talk about forward fold. So coming up into standing position. Now look down at your feet and notice if they are hip width apart, and notice if they are parallel. You could spread your toes and plant them down, back down again. And then what you want to do is you want to tuck your tail under and keep a little strength in your belly. So you don't want to have a sway back when we are standing. And so it's really, you see people, specifically, young children or maybe pregnant people that have this sway back, right? This lumbar curve. And that will actually do damage to your spine as you get older. So we do not want to herniate a disc in the low back, which is the most common spinal injury as we get older. So notice that I tuck my tail and I engage my core. Now with forward fold, oftentimes we have tight hamstrings. So if you know you have tight hamstrings, you are going to immediately know that you need to modify for forward fold. Modification is primarily in the legs. It is primarily bending deeply into your legs. So you could come to the top of your mat, and then we're going to slowly hinge, bending the knees, hinge at the hip joint, and notice as I come over, my back stays straight. And as I come over, I might even bend more deeply into my legs. I might even bring my belly down to my thighs. And then I let my fingers and hands relax down and the crown of my head relax down to the floor. So this is the correct way to do a forward fold if you have tight hamstrings. Eventually, hopefully, we'll get to the point where we can straighten our hamstrings without rounding our back. So notice my low back is straight. Now, let's just do it the wrong way. Okay. So the wrong way is I have straight legs and I'm going to come over and I am going to round my spine and I'm just going to hang like this. And you'll notice that my spine is rounded and my legs are straight. That is not what we want. So we do not want this round spine because you're going to possibly injure yourself. So bending your legs, coming down, and then beginning to straighten your legs is what you want to do. Blocks and a chair work really well for this. So if I have a chair, I might use it for my forward fold to place my hands on it. So if I'm coming down, I bend my knees, I come forward, and then maybe I place my arms or my hands, or if I have blocks, I could put them underneath my hands here. Now, when we get into vinyasa, the flowing between postures, you're going to need to bring your hands to the floor. So perhaps you can't get them to the floor with straight legs. So then you just bend your legs. So here I am, bent legs, and let's say that maybe I'm like this, right? And I can't reach the floor, and I'm like, what? She wants me to step back. Well, then I need to bend my legs more. And I bring my hands to the side of my feet. I plant my hands, and then I step one foot back, and then I step the other foot back, and then I press back and into downward dog. Active fingers. Spread your fingers, press down through your middle knuckle. Make sure that specifically your index finger is planted, that you're not having like weak hands, like they're not just rounding, right? You have active hands here. Remember, you can always keep your knees bent. and then coming back down onto all fours, and then maybe sitting your butt back for extended child's pose. Take a deep breath in. Sigh out. And then sit up with a straight spine. And that is the first introductory video for tips to begin your yoga practice.